Trading, Analytics, and Operations, if I got that right. And he's got what sounds like a pretty good presentation for us. But before we jump into that, just a couple more things that I want to mention here. So to give you guys an update on the scholarship process, I want to let you know that we're in our final steps for scholarships. We're just reviewing the applicants. I think we actually had about 30 applicants, which is pretty good. So pretty thankful for that. And what we're doing, we're getting ready to reward a scholarship for someone down here in Southern Nevada and to another person up in Northern Nevada. We should have the results of that probably within the next week or so. So I'll be thankful for that. One other thing that I want to mention here is that we're coming to the end of the year here. And thankfully, you guys will no longer have to see my face on camera because I will be moving on to another role where we have to do our annual changeover of our board. But just want to let you guys know that our board positions are going to be opening up here pretty soon. So keep an eye out for that, for those positions. And if you're interested in joining the board or interested in more information for the board, by all means, you can find the information on our websites. And Denny, who is our communications director, should be able to definitely help out with that. One last thing that I want to mention is next month on November 17th, we have a presentation coming up on hydrogen. Southwest Gas will be presenting on the future of hydrogen within the natural gas industry and where we're going with that. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Ryan Atkins. Ryan, welcome.
You're on mute, thanks, Ryan. I appreciate it. Yep, you got it. Sorry about that. Yeah, so as Robert said, I'm gonna walk through, kind of a look in general at the Western power markets, especially over the last year, just some of the challenges and the shift in what we're seeing, some of the things that NV Energy experienced this summer specifically, and also just kind of looking ahead, what do we see, from an energy market perspective. And I'll apologize in advance. I'm battling a cold, so I've got a cough drop and drinking some tea. So if I go on mute for a minute to cough, just give you a heads up. But and also this presentation, I want it to be very interactive. Please stop me, ask questions if something I say doesn't make sense. This is only really a 20-minute presentation, and we've got plenty of time. So I'm looking for people to kind of dig deeper and ask questions, whether it's on this presentation specifically or anything going on in the world related to energy. So with that, I'll go ahead and get started. Just kind of an agenda again. Really, the background is focused from August of last year. That was a time that we really started to see a shift in the markets. If you recall, that's when California had rolling blackouts, and we saw record temperatures throughout the entire West. That really seemed to mark a turning point, and things have continued to go that direction since then. I'm going to talk about this concept of net demand peak, which has to do with serving load after solar goes offline. It really has become, I would argue, maybe the biggest challenge that the entire West faces, especially the Southwest right now. And then I'm just going to talk again about some specific points that we saw from an NVE perspective this year, and then looking forward. So a little background. So again, last year in August, we saw an unprecedented heat wave, not just in one location, but nearly the entire Western United States. And that really highlighted some of the energy supply risks that I think people were not, really prepared for. Over the past, 5+ years, entities have been quickly retiring fossil fuel units, accelerating those timelines. And all of those, nearly all of that has been replaced with renewables, mostly solar and wind. And while that is a great thing, that's the direction everybody's heading, including NVE. What people are starting to learn is that this leaves a gap during the net demand peak hours. And so really for us, we're talking in the 6 to 9 time frame, 6 to 9 p.m. And this is referring to how much load needs to be served when solar and wind are not available. And so California has been going through this issue for years. They've kind of led the charge as far as getting renewables installed. And now Nevada and other states are really starting to experience this as well. And what happens is in that 6 o'clock time frame, solar is going to be quickly ramping off. And without the addition of any new fossil fuel plants, without a large amount of batteries being ready yet, there's this hole. There's nothing to come online to replace that. And so that's the challenge that everybody was starting to face and really saw last August. So as I mentioned, California had experienced rolling blackouts. A lot of other states came very, very close. It was a very tough situation on the Western grid for a couple days in August. And historically, entities, states, including Nevada, have always really been able to rely on California to provide excess energy that comes out of their state. That's just kind of been the norm. But last August, that was not the case. People who had procured energy from California saw that energy actually it was not delivered. California had to keep it for themselves. And so it was this trickle down effect where a lot of different states were impacted. And then, add in the climate piece of it, right? Ongoing drought, wildfire conditions, you just throw all that together and it makes for a really, really challenging period that we're seeing in the energy world. So going back to that net demand point, I just wanted to give an example for people to really understand what I'm talking about. So, historically and now we've always planned, and most entities have always planned to the single highest load hour, right? And that was typically in the middle of the afternoon when it's hottest, that 3 to 4 p.m. time frame, especially in Las Vegas. During this time though, right, all of the solar, and we've added a large amount of solar, as have other entities, all of that's available to help cover that, and that's all new generation. So that time frame has actually become less of a challenge, I would say, than the evening time frame. And so an example is at 3 p.m. if our load is at 8,000 megawatts, which is close to what NV Energy's peak load is. And at that time, we have 8,000 megawatts of generation available, split up with 6,000 megawatts of fossil fuel and 2,000 megawatts of solar. We're able to serve that load, no concerns, even though that's the highest hour, the highest temperature, we're good to go. The problem is, as we roll into 6 p.m., loads lower a little bit, but still remain very high. And, at that time frame, it's still hot. People are getting home from work, street lights are coming on, and rooftop solar goes offline. So all those customers come back onto the grid. So even as it's cooling off and the sun's going down, the amount of load that we have to serve and other companies have to serve remains very elevated. So let's say at 6 p.m., load is at 7,500. So it's only dropped 500 from the 3 p.m. time frame. The problem is at this time, if solar's gone offline, all we have left is the 6,000 megawatts of fossil fuel. So now we have a 1,500 megawatt gap that we've got to fill. And so if you ever read or hear about this net demand peak problem, which again, California writes about extensively, this is what it's talking about. So as we've moved quickly to get to more solar, the batteries weren't ready to bridge that gap, and we hadn't built any new gas to kind of fill in that period of time. So before I move on, any questions on this kind of topic or about solar? Okay. So looking at this summer specifically, I would argue that it was the most challenging summer that NV Energy has ever had to face. And this was for a combination of factors. So obviously we had record temperatures, not only in Las Vegas, but again, throughout many parts of the Western US. With those record temperatures came record loads for NV Energy. We had drought conditions. So in Northern California, several hydro plants had to shut down early. Hydro in the Northwest was lower than usual. And we even saw reduced output from Hoover in Southern Nevada. So this was a west-wide drought issue, not just isolated to the desert like we see in the news here with Lake Mead, for example. We had increased wildfire activity, and I do have a bullet coming up on that, but we had a real significant wildfire that caused major issues for energy supply this summer. California implemented some new rule changes that makes it harder for other states to get energy from them, so that's made it very difficult. And then just in general, again, the supply simply isn't there like it used to be. But despite all this, despite the huge loads, we had no service interruptions. Very proud of how that all turned out. So again, regionally, the supply issues, the fossil fuel resource retirements is really a big issue. And it's sensitive, right? People are hesitant to talk about needing fossil fuels, but we need something there to bridge that gap. On the climate impacts, so specifically on that bullet point with the wildfire, so the one that really hit the Southwest really hard was the bootleg fire, and that was in Southern Oregon. On July 9th, that fire spread close to the two most important transmission lines or power lines that really connect the Northwest United States to the Southwest United States. And that resulted in 5,500 megawatts of supply instantly being eliminated, not being able to flow on those lines. And, you know, as I mentioned earlier, or as I'll see coming up, our peak load reached 8,400. So 5,500 is a really significant amount of energy that was choked off from the Southwest markets. And we did see a lot of that was coming to Nevada, so we had to manage that energy we had procured not showing up. And then again, with the California ISO, following those rolling blackouts last year, the state moved to put in some more restrictive measures that just makes it extra challenging for entities like NV Energy to be able to purchase energy. Any question on that as far as, you know, I'll go into loads, but anything as far as West-wide and what we're seeing about the fires, California ISO, anything like that?
You know, Ryan, one thing I have to say, as my group over here works on more the gas side is, I think a lot of people don't realize that something that happens hundreds, thousands of miles away can affect the markets down south. For instance, being that here in Nevada, we do bring our natural gas in from Canada. If something were to happen up in Canada, that would affect pricing and availability for gas down here. Sounds like it's very similar to some of the issues that you have on the energy side.
Yeah, 100%. So we, you know, the Northwest, so Washington, Oregon, even into Canada, I read that's a hydro-rich region. And so in the summer, typically when they're cooler than we are here when it's 115, they do have available hydro and some available wind. And California and the Southwest is dependent on that energy flowing down. And so when something like that happens, it has a huge, huge impact. So yeah, absolutely. It's not just what's happening regionally. It's basically anything west of the Rockies that happens can have that downstream impact.
Right. And just a little update here, guys. I know that I think your mics have been turned off, but if you have any questions, you want to put it into the chat. We'd be happy to read off for you. But definitely some interesting subjects here for Ryan.
Yep. All right, so moving on. So looking at, again, this summer and what we saw specifically in Nevada. So we saw the second hottest June in history, and Las Vegas reached 116. So in June, we started to see, you know, this heat really early. Typically, we're going to see it more in July and August, but it started out hot right away. In July, we reached 117 degrees, which ties for the all-time record temperature of any day in history for Las Vegas. It was also the same weekend Allegiant Stadium, the new Raiders Stadium, opened. And so you had a lot of tourists, just a lot of extra demand in the system along with this extreme heat. And then in Reno, you know, they experienced more 100-degree days this summer than ever before. So it wasn't just isolated to the Vegas region. Reno was also hit with the extreme heat. And just to highlight, so our previous peak load was set in 2016. And this is so our Vegas and Reno loads combined. And that was at 7,933 megawatts. This July, we set new records 7 straight days, and July 9th was our peak, and it was 451 megawatts higher. That is very, very significant. So, you know, every year we try to plan for a 1 in 10 type year, but every year is that. It's no longer 1 in 10. So we're not just NV Energy, but all utilities are really having to rethink how they plan for these extremes, which are becoming more and more common.
So Ryan, are you seeing it maybe partly because of the growth in population here in Nevada growth of industry, but also the excess heat?
Absolutely, yeah. So we've got obviously huge residential growth, and then we've also got commercial growth both in Reno and Las Vegas. And so that's been happening. And then obviously with COVID last year, it made it even harder to understand kind of what impact that growth was going to have. And so, yeah, a combination of all of it is coming into play for sure. I saw a question pop up. Where did that go?
Yeah, Tim has a question. He says, Ryan, are you looking at enforced demand side management programs?
Enforced, no. Expanding voluntary and incentivizing people, absolutely. And that's going to be coming up on a slide. That's going to be absolutely key, not only for NV Energy, but for the West as a whole, is understanding how to manage load, right? To peak shave, as we call it. So during that 6 to 9 time frame, how can we entice people to back off on that demand? But not as far as anything forced. I think at some point we'll be looking at changing our time of use rates. So right now, I believe it's from 2 to 7 p.m. if you're signed up on that rate. So we need to shift that. California has recently done that, but perhaps going to just more expensive time of use just over that 6 to 9 time frame. So we're talking about all those types of options on how to help manage the demand side of things. I saw a couple more pop up. Are you able to read those off?
Yeah, I think that's just more, we have some people who are possibly in the lobby.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can wait if you want to try to get them in.
Denny, are we good to continue?
Yeah, the lobby should be bypassed by folks. I think he just needs to try to join again.
All right, very good.
Okay. All right. So what are some of the actions that NV Energy specifically took this summer to manage these high loads? So we had some new strategies implemented. One of them was really working to participate more in the Western energy imbalance market. So we call that the EIM. That is an hourly market that now I believe 19 entities in the West have signed up for, and essentially allows for greater pooling and sharing of resources across all of the states. So it's similar to a MISO or an SPP or a PJM. Obviously, the West is unique in that we're not one organized market. And so this is kind of the first step towards moving towards it, except this is voluntary and it's on an hourly basis. However, now that so many entities have joined, a huge amount of the overall supply is available through that. And we saw that on the hottest days, we were able to get excess energy from areas like Montana and Idaho and Utah flowing into our system to help us meet that demand. And again, that is absolutely key to the future is I believe the West needs to move to an RTO or an ISO. The Southwest needs to be able to send out their excess solar. They need to be able to utilize the different wind and fossil fuels that maybe is available a little more in the East, get the hydro in the Northwest, and just have everything fully optimized on a 5-minute basis automatically, rather than this siloed out approach where everybody's, in it for themselves. So this is the first step towards it. And if you're not aware, in the latest Senate bill, one of the requirements for NV Energy was to become a participant in a full regional market by 2030. So that is the future of the West. Just obviously is very, there's a lot of infrastructure to be built up. So we're looking at all those options, and Colorado passed a similar bill, and I think other states are going to be moving in the same direction. So along with that, we also just had to shift our focus to finding whatever energy supply we could that was diversified outside of California. So again, in the past, we were able to rely on that California supply. But after last summer, we realized that was not going to be as reliable, and we had to move away from that. We also just did some basic things with, changing how we operated our power plants to mitigate risk and ensure that they were going to be reliable. We also did multiple upgrades to the turbines on some of our existing gas plants, and that gave us some extra capacity. We had new solar that did come on, and we did have 35 megawatts of battery resources, our first ones come on this summer. Obviously when we're trying to serve 8,400 megawatts of load, that's just a drop in the bucket. But getting our feet wet, and we have a lot more coming down the pipeline in the coming years. It was great to get those online.
Hey Ryan, so
yeah.
your battery backup, is that both north and south, or is it specifically regional?
It's going to be a combination of both. The ones that we had come online, both were in the north actually this summer.
Okay.
And most of what we're signing up for and procuring, and this is kind of common across the Southwest, is solar plus battery. So they come as a combined resource, but essentially we can use the solar to charge the batteries in those morning hours, and then discharge the battery when the solar goes off in the evening hours. So it's really a great combination. And again, that's the future where we're headed, a combination of that demand response and those battery resources to help cover that evening peak time frame.
Are you seeing prices for the battery backups coming down significantly?
Yep, just like solar, right? Just as there's more demand and more competition. Well, I should say it was coming down. The supply chain issues that we've been experiencing over the past several months has started to kind of put a wrinkle in things. So we'll see how that develops. But until that kind of was starting to get choked off, prices had been dropping pretty significantly.
Okay, good. Frank has a question here. He says, is the battery installation near the solar, or is it distributed?
Yeah, so the majority is going to be next to the solar as a combined resource. However, we are looking at other, kind of standalone battery resources on the distribution system. But typically what we're seeing for suppliers is going to be a solar plus battery combination.
Scott has a question. 35, is it megavolt amp or a battery lithium ion question?
I would honestly have to confirm that. My belief is everything's lithium ion that we've had, but I'd have to confirm with my renewables group. And it's 35 megawatt hours that we got. But I can confirm the lithium ion if anyone's interested.
Okay.
Just a couple other points. We worked really closely with our distribution only customers. So those are the 704Bs, right? So some of the casinos, a Switch. We had a lot of challenges last year and this year. Those suppliers, when they left NV Energy, they signed up with marketing companies who didn't necessarily have a supply. They would just be leaning on an entity like California as well. And so if that entity couldn't get energy to those customers, NV Energy is forced to supplement that and help, serve that kind of imbalance. And so we really worked closely with those customers to let them know we're watching, we're obligated to serve them for an hour, but if it goes beyond that per our tariff, we are able to cut them off. And so we worked to monitor and communicate and ensure that they were not leaning on the system, so any other customers were going to be disadvantaged.
All right.
I see Rodrigo asked a question about natural gas mini generators. Great question. A lot of it, to be honest, Rodrigo, is political in nature, and just NV Energy and a lot of other companies, we've committed to getting to certain thresholds of renewable energy. I will say though, since this has all been going on, so California recently just installed about 150 megawatts of fast start gas peakers. So those kind of like mini generators, as you call them. And SRP down in Phoenix just agreed and signed on to spend about $1 billion on some new gas peaking units. So for the last several years, it's almost been kind of a no-go to invest in anything new from a fossil fuel perspective, but you're starting to see that shift a little bit just because people are realizing that it's needed. And so that's what we're doing, but we're doing it with our own generators. by upgrading our turbines, we're able to almost get the equivalent of these kind of mini peakers just on units that already exist. So that's been our focus, and we've got a lot more of that going on before next summer. But I do think you'll start to see more and more gas peaking units built just to diversify along with the batteries. So it's a great question.
And you're doing that both in north and south?
Correct, yeah. And then, just a couple more points here. Just working with our demand response team, strategic deployment of the hours we're using it. How do we get the most out of it? We do have some irrigation customers we can work with. They've signed up. We can, have them reduce load or shut down. And in real dire situations, we'll work with our large customers, right? Our large commercial companies. We'll work with them. Usually they have some ability to back off certain things. And if we need to, we'll work with them. And honestly, everybody is really willing to chip in when it gets to that point. So our major accounts team works really closely with a lot of customers in that regard. So that last bullet point mentioned, calls to conserve. And I thought this was interesting. For the first time, we did this last August, and we did this again twice this summer, where we're asking our residential customers to reduce their demand during this critical, 6 to 9 p.m. time frame. Now in California, this is really the norm. They call them flex alerts. I'd say they issue probably 12 to 15 a summer. Anytime it's hot, they're worried about resources, they'll reach out and they see a really big impact where customers are voluntarily, bumping up the thermostat a couple degrees, whatever it might be. And so for us, we try to avoid doing that. But on the most critical days, we had 2 time periods this summer. We did send out that messaging, and I'm sure a lot of you saw that. It came through email. We posted it on social media, probably saw it in the news. The first one was on July 10th. So this was the day that we saw that 117 degrees. This was also when that bootleg fire, those transmission impacts were still in place. So we didn't have access to the same supply from the Northwest that we typically would. And then those combinations led to essentially zero market liquidity. So there was basically nothing left over from any other companies that we could buy from. So we issued that call for customers to do anything they could. We asked for thermostats to be bumped up to 78, closing windows, not using major appliances, whatever customers can do. And when that adds up to a whole lot of customers, it really does make a big impact. And then we also did this on September 8th. So this was later in the year, but there were a lot of moving parts here that made us really concerned. So again, we saw temperatures from 108 to 110, which was records for that time frame, and the National Weather Service had issued some heat advisories. Also at that time, due to the drought, a lot of hydro resources were already depleted and shut off. So that limited some of the supply that may have been available earlier in the summer. We had also been informed by several other companies in the West that they had power plants that had tripped. So we knew that supply limitations were going to be in place. And then finally, California actually had a lot of heat, and their highest loads of the year came in the September timeframe. And then to top that off, they had natural gas supply concerns. So there was some issues on the El Paso pipeline that fed into Southern California. And California had real concerns if they would have enough gas to run their generators. So all of that, when you took it as a whole, excuse me, there were so many risk factors at play. We wanted to be proactive and say, hey, let's get the help from the customers rather than all of this come in, and be reactive and not ready for it.
So Ryan,
a lot of
people.
Yep.
Just out of curiosity, did you see any effects of maybe transition of load due to COVID? A lot of folks, not necessarily because the casinos being shut down, but most folks kind of more working from home instead of in commercial buildings.
It's a great question, and it's very difficult to quantify. We just don't have the visibility into the data to know exactly what's contributed, what came from COVID and what didn't. One of the theories we have on why loads were also so high this year was that there's kind of this hybrid model. So you do have a lot of people working from home, but at the same time, there's still people in the office. So all the large office buildings are still on 100%. So you start adding up, it's more load coming from that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Any other questions? I get a lot of questions usually on the calls to conserve, so I'll just see if anybody else has any questions on that topic.
Looks like Gary answered the question. It sounds like that the batteries are lithium ion.
Perfect.
From Tesla.
All right. So looking ahead, right? What does this look like for NV Energy? What does it look like for the West? So to start, personally, I mean, we don't see anything changing from a climate perspective, right? I know we got a ton of rain in Northern California and Northern Nevada. That did help to replenish a lot of the hydro reservoirs, but I don't think we can count on that on a year-to-year basis, right? I think we have to assume going forward, we're going to continue to experience record temperatures. We're going to have drought conditions. We're going to see these wildfires. It's just been too many years in a row for us not to really plan on that happening at this point. And so because of that, we've got to figure out how to get enough capacity to cover these rising loads and having those challenges on top of it. So we're continuing to upgrade all of our existing large gas plants. So as I mentioned, we did it for this summer. We're doing a lot more for next summer. That's going to give us some more availability from those gas generators. We're continuing to put a big focus on how to grow our demand response programs. So residential programs, commercial programs, what can we do just to get a better impact, when we want to implement those. As I mentioned too with the batteries, we've contracted for a large amount of batteries. The current expectation is to have all of that in by 2024. I'm still hopeful of that, but obviously the supply chain delays that we're seeing certainly adds a level of risk that all of these are going to get pushed back. And certainly there's just huge demand for everything. California is looking to install batteries at just crazy pace. Arizona, anyone with solar is really looking to add these batteries. We're also looking at, pushing back, the retirement or the expiration of contracts that we have with fossil fuel units. So even if it's only a couple of years, just to make sure we can get through these summers until batteries come online, just really doing a deep dive and being prudent about that to make sure that we've got the available resources. And then we'll just continue to work with counterparties all the way from, again, British Columbia, all the way over to Colorado, Montana, wherever we can find energy outside of California, we're going to continue to do that. West-wide, I think you'll see it, and again, credit to California, they're really leading the charge on this, but really innovative and aggressive demand response programs. So I know they've been working with Google. I think they set up a new program with Walmart, but really figuring out how to quickly increase the amount of megawatts they can get for that evening net demand peak time frame. As I mentioned, California and Arizona, they already have agreed to add some new gas generation. And again, these are peaking units, so they're things that can be turned on typically in 10 minutes. So you just run it for those few hours to bridge the gap. They're not meant to be used all the time. They're not huge plants, but I think we will start to see more of that. And similar to us, I think you're just going to see some of these fossil fuel retirements, delayed by a couple years, just making sure that nobody leaves themselves too short. And then the accelerated battery installations. So, California this summer, they were supposed to have 1,500 megawatts installed. I believe they got a little over 1,000. But again, it's just as soon as they're available, they're getting installed. That really is a huge component. Let's see. So I'm just going through the questions real quick.
So it looks like Tim's got a question. He says, are state politicians talking about getting more fossil generation being okay?
Yeah, so I mean, again, we saw it. So California, so Gavin Newsom had issued an emergency order this summer to essentially allow some of that to happen. And then Arizona, their state commission agreed to let that happen. There's always going to be a fight, with fossil fuel. I can't speak for sure on the Nevada side. Obviously, I don't know if I see complete new builds, but continuing to upgrade and doing things like that. I think state politicians have to at least have some flexibility, and it's up to the utilities, right? We meet with the state government officials. We try to educate and explain the challenges we're seeing in the state of Nevada and in the West, and what we can do, because our ultimate goal, our number one job, is we've got to ensure that the lights and the AC are on all the time for our residents. And if that means we have to pitch some sort of fossil fuel piece, so be it. But I don't. So those discussions are ongoing, and I think you're starting to see more flexibility than, let's say, 3, 4, 5 years ago.
Okay, good. Another question he has is, are you hooked up with BPA, SWP, SWPA, TVA, etc.?
So BPA, I'm assuming that's Bonneville Power Administration. Yes, we transact with them, so they're up in the Northwest. Essentially, any counterparty, again, west of the Rockies and into Canada, we transact with and interact with. It's once you go over into ERCOT in Texas and over into MISO and SPP, there's not the interconnection that makes it easy to flow energy across the DC-AC ties. TVA, I think that's Tennessee Valley Authority. So no, again, because just they're in that other market, we don't have a way to get it to them. So anything in the Western United States, yes. Anything outside of it would be a no.
All right. Aaron has a comment here. He says, great presentation. We discussed the possibility of more voluntary commercial interruptible rates being created. Do we see those being approved before next summer?
I would lean towards no, unfortunately. I think it just takes, it's really time consuming to get these new rates implemented into our tariffs. I know our teams are working incredibly hard on coming up with those rates and soliciting feedback, what would work, what wouldn't, but I have a hard time thinking they'll be here in time for next summer.
Gotcha. Rodrigo asks, if nuclear power is a consideration?
Not for NV Energy. Nuclear is interesting because of just the retirements of the existing facilities. So Diablo Canyon's the big one in Southern California that's supposed to retire for the next few years. That is a hugely political debate. I think it's an absolutely terrible idea to take that offline. It's so critical to the Western energy supply. So that's one of those where they're in those discussions. Can they push that back? There's also one in Washington. So I don't think I see new nuclear plants being built in the West. I think it's just going to be negotiating to keep the currently existing ones online for a longer period of time. Okay.
Harshal has a question here. He's asking about the percentage of residential versus industrial customers for NV Energy.
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Aaron may actually be able to answer that. If I had to give a ballpark for like our summer peak loads, it would probably be, 70 to 80% residential. But that's really a guess. I honestly just don't see those splits. I'm not dealing with those splits myself on my trading team.
Okay. So one curious question I have for you. Obviously, when the temperature goes up, you guys have to generate more electricity for that demand. Do you also see a large or drop in efficiency for your generation as well as your transmission?
So do we see a drop in efficiency when it gets hot and demand is up? Was that the question?
Yes.
Yes, to an extent, right? Because as we need to call on more and more plants, we're obviously running our most economic options first. So as we'll start turning on those peaking gas units, which are more expensive, and maxing out our units into higher configurations that use a little more gas. So you will see an efficiency drop. It's not crazy, but the answer is yes.
Well, I guess I'm more referred to, does the rising temperatures, affect the efficiency of the power lines?
Oh, gotcha. Okay. Well, and actually, another point just on the plants. So the rise in temperatures, a real impact that it does have is, we call them ambient D rates. The hotter it is, the less output the power plants can give. So that does, we could see a difference of 200 or 300 megawatts of what our power plants could give us in the winter versus the summer. So that does hurt us. It's just less supply we have. And then on the transmission lines, though, no, I mean, we don't really see impacts as far as the efficiency in that regard.
Okay.
I mean, just tied to you, Robert, and your job, obviously, is, gas is a key component of this. And so, from a power perspective, we're trying to balance so higher demand, adding more gas, needing more gas supply, a finite amount of pipeline capacity. But then at the same time, if you have large amounts of renewables coming on, offsetting that, how is that going to impact the gas supply and needs? So that's obviously a component. I didn't really touch on it in this presentation, but certainly, so my team manages all of our gas procurement and scheduling and optimization. So something that we'll continue to deal with along with the power side of things.
So there's been some topics coming up in the news lately about a large demand for gas prices. I know gas prices have been going up recently. They're talking about shortages over in Europe, which obviously if there's shortages in Europe, then it increases demand on supplies here in the U.S. to maybe move over to Europe. What are you expecting for futures?
I would say through at least next summer, I expect gas prices to remain elevated. And so the trickle down effect of that is now we're seeing crazy demand on coal. Like mines can't even keep up with coal because everyone's trying to switch back on their coal units because it's so much cheaper than natural gas. So you always have this just things swing back and forth. But I think right now with Europe and Asia, with such a demand, the LNG exports from the US is huge. There's a lot of exports going into Mexico. And there just hasn't been a ton of new production that's been switched online. So until that happens, I don't really see a huge relief in gas prices again until we probably get through next summer. And again, a mild winter would help, but if you see cold winters around and storage is drained, I don't know how familiar people are, but I mean, historically, we've seen natural gas trade, let's call it around $3 per MMBTU. Currently, it's trading, around $6 per MMBTU. I think this winter you could see $20+ per MMBTU, right? I mean, you could see some real spike events if you have some cold snaps. So it'll be interesting to see.
Do you know how the ERCOT incidents in February affected us down here in Southern Nevada?
I would say little to none, other than us, giving speeches that it wouldn't happen in Nevada. No, I think so. ERCOT has done a really good job in isolating themselves. That's what Texas wanted, right? They're completely cut off from the rest of the United States from a grid perspective. And so, I mean, honestly, all it did was just give a lesson to other utilities to make sure that they're freeze protecting all their units and investing the appropriate money into their resources to make sure they can handle extreme conditions. I think that's it.
Okay. Yeah, I know from our perspective, we did see pricing situations with the gas. Obviously, there was a lot of freeze-offs and with the gas coming out of Permian, which affected our prices here. And obviously, because we're all interconnected, even if Southern Nevada doesn't receive a lot of gas from Permian, obviously it still affects the gas coming from the Rockies. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's just, we didn't see a huge spike at the time, but I think just kind of rolling into all the other things that have been going in throughout the world, driving prices up, just another piece of it. But I didn't think we saw anything that was crazy significant specific to Nevada Power. Right. And then Sierra Pacific, obviously, we get all of our gas from, more from the Canada side of things. But yeah, good question.
Do you foresee possibly with the increase in gas costs affecting the possibility of going more renewable?
By renewable gas?
No, more renewable resources. The fact that maybe making it for maybe wind and solar becoming more economical.
I mean, in theory, yes, but again, how do we solve that problem from 6 to 9 p.m. when the renewables aren't available, right? So, if people were willing to say, hey, rolling blackouts potentially in the summer from 6 to 9 p.m. are okay, then I would say, yeah, that's possible, but it's just not feasible. Like for all the renewable you build, you need some sort of backup. So whether that's natural gas, whether that's, I mean, really it's natural gas or batteries, you've just got to have that to back it up.
Right. Okay. Is AV Energy looking into the possibility of purchasing renewable natural gas supplies?
We're doing our research. It's my team isn't necessarily leading that charge, or longer term planning is, but absolutely those discussions are ongoing. But it's something that we're looking at.
Okay, good. Let's see. Frank has a question here on rolling blackouts. 1 hour is no worse than 15 minutes. If you were forced to have blackouts, longer but less often would be better with notice. How much wind does NV Energy use?
Yeah, as far as the blackouts, I mean, really our goal is just no blackouts. That's my number. I mean, that's all we care about in the summer is no service interruptions, and we've been able to do that. So I'm confident we'll be able to keep that going, but it's a good point, Frank. I appreciate it. As far as wind, we have very little wind. So again, if you're looking at a 8,400 megawatt peak load in the summer, we have one wind resource in northern Nevada. I think it peaks out close to about 150 megawatts. But our focus from a renewable perspective has been we have a good amount of geothermal and then really ramping up the solar and battery.
Okay. My understanding is you guys are getting ready to build out your electric highway also to potentially bring more renewable resources from the north down south.
Yeah, and again, I'm not necessarily the subject matter expert on that, but we do, we've got a big project called GreenLink that was approved. The goal of that is essentially linking northern Nevada and southern Nevada. It would open up access, to that northwest hydro. To the northwest is really rich in wind, so just being able to flow more energy back and forth, it's really key. And especially as I mentioned, going to a regional market, you need enough transmission to be able to flow between all the entities. So that's huge. It's critical from an infrastructure perspective. So that'll just really open up a lot of optionality to get more access to energy, and specifically renewable energy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, it looks like we're starting to wrap up here. Any last minute questions anybody has for Ryan? Let's see. Frank says, "What's up with the Focus Solar plant?" I'm assuming he's talking about Ivanpah.
Yeah, that would be my guess. So with Ivanpah, yeah, so NV Energy doesn't get the output from Ivanpah. That goes to California. So I don't have a lot of details as far as, I mean, do you mean just like, is it running or who gets it? I'm not sure the exact question, but NV Energy doesn't get the output from that plant. But if you have any follow-up, just type it up, Frank, and I can do the best to answer.
Is it running? Is it producing as expected?
My understanding is it's running. As far as the actual output, I remember there were a lot of issues after initial construction. They weren't getting as much as they were promised. I don't know if they've remedied that. What I've found is projects that are unique. So that was one of them. There's one in Tonopah that uses molten salt. So ones that really tried to go outside the typical, plant structure had a lot of challenges in producing what they promised. So my guess would be that they're not quite there, but I can't speak to it just because, again, we don't have the contract with them, so I don't have all the visibility.
Looks like Casey says that they are running, but not great weather this year, otherwise operating well. Thank you, Casey.
Perfect. There you go. Yeah.
We have our subject matter expert on the line with Ivanpah. Thank you. All right. Any last minute questions here before we let Ryan back to his normal day? Ryan, I want to thank you for joining us here. This has been awesome. I think I definitely learned a lot here. I got to say I'm a little bit of an energy geek here, so it's always good to hear about some of these details.
Yeah, hopefully it was informative. And honestly, if anyone else, if something pops into your mind after this, you have some questions, feel free to reach out. Would love to connect and answer anything that you guys may be interested in.
Yes. So, and yes, Curtis, thanks to all of our Oklahoma folks for joining us. Just to let you guys know, so we actually have our Oklahoma chapter who's joined us here to listen to the presentation. So, appreciate you guys joining on. Hopefully, you'll be able to find this as enlightening as I have. So.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks. We'll talk with you soon, Robert.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Have a great day.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining. And just as a reminder, we have our hydrogen presentation coming up on November 17th. The Focus Southwest Gas will be giving that presentation. That'll be a good one. So please join us for our next meeting next month. Have a great day, everybody.